you, you guys, if there's one thing that brings out some kind of an imposter syndrome nightmare in me, and it's because of my own, like, perceived shortcomings, I'm not a handy person. I can't build things. I can't fix things. I'm really, really bad. Okay. And having repair people at my house, it just makes me anxious, like a cat. Like when I can't even put it into words. When I had some guys out to install a ceiling fan on our porch. We've got a porch with a roof over top. Oh, we've been saving up. You know, this is something I've wanted to do since we had the house. And also there was a hole by the downspout that a squirrel had gotten up into the roof, and we needed
I
that
like Dylan
patched.
how this is becoming less la-di-da the more he talks about it. There's a family of raccoons up there.
We've seen the odd possum.
I electrocute myself every time I touch the metal railing. Something's wrong there.
A hobo encampment.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the problem is we've got an old house, and it's got old wiring and old fixtures, and whenever we get repair people out, they always have a plethora of problems because you're dealing with, just all kinds of stuff that I don't understand. So they're like, hey, is this wire grounded? And I go, I don't know.
Oh.
Why would I know this? That's why you're here. You know, it was a ceiling fan that was actually had two fans that sprouted off of one fixture. And they go, how are we supposed to get that up there? And I go, I don't know. I don't know. They go, is that going to support the weight? I said, I don't know. I didn't even buy this. I wasn't even there when they bought the ceiling fan. My wife said, I found a ceiling fan at Lowe's that we like. She sent me a picture. I said, that's great, hon. And is this going to support the weight? I don't know. And then they said, well, your downspout's not loose. It's just got a hole. And I'm like, yeah, I don't care about the words. Just fix it. Fix it so that there's no squirrel that gets up there at night. I don't care if it's loose or it was like, oh, it's not that it's loose. It's just that the part around it is too wide. Well, okay, to me that's loose, but all right, fine. Fix it. Put a piece of plywood up there, stuff it with cardboard. I don't care. You're the one on the ladder. And so then, Dave, and I'm sorry. I think part of this is that I was raised to believe that men were supposed to be able to do certain things. And I can't do any of those things. And it makes me really, really self-conscious because I'm picturing in my mind these people, you know, what they must think of this half man that they're looking at. And and so then I've got to figure out, there's always one time in the home repair process when I've hired somebody where I've got to figure out where I'm going to stand. Because I don't know whether I should
be. This is me exactly. I'm always in the next room and it's dark and I'm sitting there with the doors closed, just thinking like, oh, I'm the worst. I don't know any of this.
Oh my God, Dave, that was me this morning. Because I was like, I'm not going to stand out and watch these guys like I'm hovering over them because I don't like to work that way, you know, and I don't swing a hammer. So I can't do people physical damage. So I went in just far enough into the house to be out of sight and over to the side, all the lights off, sat there quietly with my iPhone pretending to scroll through Twitter, but not reading anything because all I'm busy doing is feeling ashamed of this inadequacy that I feel for myself and just sitting there and twitching for the entire time that they're working out there. And then, of course, they're like, Mr. Geiger. And I jump up and hit the ceiling. I go, yes, what? We're done. Oh, you're done? What about the grounding? Oh, yeah, we figured that out. Is it going to support the weight? Oh, yeah, it's going to support the weight. So all of these crises that they had brought to me had just kind of disappeared. Either that or they were torturing me. I'm still not sure which. But the good news is, at least until it falls crashing to the ground, we've got a ceiling fan.
Cut to next week, right, Dylan?
But I want to tell you both what goes through my mind whenever I have a repairman over at my house.
Okay.
Please don't murder me.
Oh, jeez. Oh, God.
Okay, you win.
You win. You win. You win. Wow. That is a different path we walk. And boy, Brad, your concerns seem very small now. Very small indeed.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes my head goes to the fantasy of an attack, but it's more along the lines of a swirly that you'd get in high school. I've got to be honest, I've never been afraid for my life. That's I guess you've got the trump card on that one.
That is boy, you've just won the great dichotomy of modern life right there, Brad. Like, I'm worried about being called out about being slightly less than a perfect person, and Bill's like, I don't want to be murdered. All right, well, guess who wins? Well, we're not going to do better than that for a contrast. So I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, Dylan, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, and let's introduce our wonderful, wonderful guest for the day. It is our dear friend Dylan Meconis, hailing from the Pacific Northwest. We won't reveal the location, just so that there's no repairman
just in case
nearby.
There's a wandering repairman out there.
Just in case there's a wandering repairman. But you know her work for years. You can find it all at dylanmeconis.com. That's DYLANMECONIS.com. And we're here specifically because on June 25th, she's got incredible news. You've been working on it now for 2 years, 3 years, a new book?
Since the dawn of time.
Since the dawn of time. I want to tell you, not only has she been watercoloring it, I think you've also been creating your own paper, brushes, and watercolor pigments to make this the most beautifully handcrafted book I've ever seen. It is gorgeous.
Yeah, hand grinding the minerals.
Hand grinding the minerals, and she's going out and catching the sea snails, grinding them up for the purples. Anyway, Dylan's book is called Queen of the Sea. It's a beautiful graphic novel. I've been lucky enough to see the pages in person before they were scanned and obviously reproduced. And let me give you the quick rundown on the book because we're going to talk about it. So it follows Margaret. Margaret has spent her entire life far from the shores of Albion on the tiny but idyllic island that a small convent of nuns call home. Then a tragedy reveals the island's sinister true purpose and brings two powerful and dangerous new residents to its shores. Margaret must befriend a meddlesome former queen, rescue a shipwrecked dude, outwit a power-hungry mother superior, discover her own identity, and possibly save a kingdom in the process. And that is, once again, Queen of the Sea, dropping from Candlewick on June 25th. And Dylan, welcome to the show.
Woo! Nice to be here again.
That is exciting. So but in all seriousness, I know, having known you as a friend, you've been talking about and working on this for at least 2.5, 3 years, right? Am I wrong there?
Yeah, in terms of like straight up production time on just getting the art done and honing the manuscript with the editor, it's been maybe 3 years, three plus years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, with traditional publishing, you turn it in and then a year later it comes out. So there's a little bit of lag time. It's not like in floppy comics where I send the files to Oni Press and then like 20 minutes later it's in stores.
Yeah.
So now, knowing you and also knowing every artist that each one of us contains, you have great excitement, I'm sure. You also have great fear and anxiety, probably, I'm sure, and great hope. What is winning out at this moment right now?
I would say fatigue, actually.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay.
I'm real tired, y'all. Very tired. So tired.
Well, now I should mention it. I didn't do this at the top of the show, but how many stars has it already won or been acclaimed with before it's
Dave,
even launched?
I don't pay attention to things like that.
Liar, pants on fire. What? How? Come on now. Give me how many stars it's already won.
No, seriously, I should call my dad and he'd be able to recite it. From a lot of places, from School Library Journal and Book List and Publishers Weekly. I think I'm missing Kirkus. Kirkus are the scary ones, so that was really cool.
Right.
And it got a really lovely write-up in the New York Times Book Review.
Oh, it did? I didn't see that one.
Yeah, super lovely. It was just in the print edition a couple weeks ago, and they like to delay putting stuff online, so it should be up shortly, I think.
Oh, darn. I was just Googling it and I didn't find it. That makes sense. Okay, good.
Yeah, but it's gotten a ton of really good advanced critical attention, and that feels real good.
That's delightful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the big early battles, isn't it? Is getting the critics to love it, because then the librarians will love it, then the booksellers will love it, and it works its way down the chain, right?
Yeah, because it's a middle grade book. In this case, that means it's for sort of 10 to 14-year-olds in general.
Right.
And those kids aren't really at a point where they're going out and buying books themselves with all the money they earn from their jobs. So to get to them, you really have to go through teachers and parents and librarians. And those are folks who rely a lot on trade publications to kind of point them in the right direction.
Right.
Or they rely on, a bookseller who will actually hand a book to them and say, this is great, your kid will love it if they're into thing X, Y, or Z. So winning over those folks before the book even comes out is a really big deal.
Yeah. Well, and on that note, in terms of winning over middle schoolers via their interlocutors, boy, that's a bad use of that. But is it the kind of thing where you might not know if it's a hit for like 18 to 24 months?
I mean, I don't think that anybody in traditional publishing ever really has an immediate sense of how well something is doing unless it goes into a second print run.
Right.
And even then, that's so dependent on how big the initial print run was. But generally, you can have a pretty good gauge on whether or not it's going to do well based on some of the critical attention beforehand, just because that impacts ordering. Right. And because it is such a captive audience, you tend to know you're going to do okay, at least.
Right.
I mean, some stuff, like, there's no predicting. Like, nobody would have read the first volume of Harry Potter and been like, this is going to take over the world. I read it as the target audience when the first volume came out, and I was like, meh, it's okay, a bit of a Roald Dahl ripoff. Well, 20 years later.
Okay. Awkward pause while we all think about it. Yep, all right, you're right about that. But at the very least, what you're saying, though, is that you have cleared the first big hurdle, which is you haven't been lost to critical notice, right?
Yeah, and just getting that attention up front is what's really tough. Middle grade has a lot of publications coming out. That's where graphic novels are kind of really taking off right now. So right. It can be easy to get lost, or to just not wind up making a ton back. But it's really good news to get good press in advance.
Right. Right. Well, now, lest I let Brad get a question in sideways here, I'm going to ask one more before we go. So how did this idea initially germinate with you? Like, where were you? What was happening? What was the first scene that came into your mind? How did it start? To be honest, I just asked myself, what would be the most self-indulgent, pleasurable project I could possibly do that would work for this particular age group? What when I think about it makes me relax and feel eager instead of feeling like, oh no, I'd have to draw X, Y, and Z for 400 years. And this was a combination of a whole bunch of stuff that I really, really love doing, and an excuse to do some stuff that I wanted to do more of. And I had just been kicking around small related ideas. And so having it kind of come together in one big glob was the real motivating factor, was going, oh, you know what? What the heck? I'm just going to go all out and make the most me thing I can possibly think of. And if people don't dig it, I'm not going to worry about it. Right, because the joy was there for you. Yeah. Yeah, and I also knew, this is a publishing project. This is not something that would necessarily succeed or be possible to do on my own, or as a self-publishing project, or as an online project. So I knew exactly how I was going to approach pitching it. And if it didn't fly, then I would know, okay, this marketplace just isn't ready for me, or I'm not ready for it. And I have other manuscripts lying around that, bonked just because the subject matter happened to be oversaturated at the time that I finished the manuscript. So I know it's a really fitful marketplace, but I knew that if I did something totally bizarro me-ish, there wasn't going to be anything else like it out there. And that would either be a huge plus or, death. Right. What were the 4 or 5 elements that you were smashing together, as you said, to sort of make the ideal project? Yeah, I had been enjoying using watercolors, and I really wanted to use more of those. I've done a bunch of projects that are really heavily digital in how the art is made or how the art is finished. And that's it's efficient, but it's sort of soul-sucking. There's something really nice about having a finished page, like a physical page at the end of the day, to feel like you've made a thing.
It's more meditative and less distracted than it is if you're working digitally and zipping between menus. So I wanted to do something that was a good fit for natural media. I really love drawing historical settings, as anybody who follows my work will know. I will do anything to avoid drawing a car or an apartment building, death before apartment buildings. I really love drawing nature and animals. I really love doing spot illustrations, which is illustrations that are just kind of floating in a page of text. Mm-hmm. So instead of being like a full window into a world, it might just be a picture of an object or a part of a setting or just a person. So I knew that
and that's sort of like what Winnie the Pooh type thing that had, right? Where Winnie was sort of half floating on the,
exactly. Okay. I have really, really liked the graphic novels by a famous British cartoonist, Posy Simmonds.
Oh yeah, Posy, yeah.
She's an incredible talent, and she's virtually unknown in the United States, which makes me want to cry.
She's amazing.
She's frankly a genius. She's a master of like 5 different cartoon forms.
Did you see the big interview that the New York Times had with her a week or 2 ago?
Yes.
She's great.
She's amazing. She's a hero.
For Americans and Canadians that might not know her work, when I lived in England, I was so impressed by her level of skill and amazed when I got back that no one in America had heard of her.
Mm-hmm. It's bonkers. It's a really weird cultural mismatch. I don't understand it.
She is very English, to be fair, but it is. I mean, like, Brad, imagine if tea could come to life and create comics. That's Posy Simmonds.
But it's bitter tea. It's very bitter tea.
It's very bitter tea. Yeah. But sorry, I cut you off. Keep going. So, so the idea of physical work in your hands, watercolors, line work, ink work.
Mm-hmm. And Posy Simmonds has done a few sort of hybrid novels for adults. And by hybrid, I mean it's almost a collage of prose and things that are meant to look like found objects or like excerpts from newspapers or blogs and pure comics. And she's done a beautiful job with them of using limited color and having really evocative images, but also having a lot of character, voice, and interiority that appears in the prose sections.
Right.
It's just a really compelling and naturalistic balance. It's not like a lot of books that are out there for kids that mix comics and illustration and prose, where they're either like, ooh, a wacky kid sketchbook, or they're pages of prose intermingled with several pages of super rich silent illustration. Right. Which I find kind of disorienting as a reader, like just having to pop between pure prose and pure image really kind of, it throws me off. So I really liked her approach and her focus on illustration. And I wanted to do something like that, but for the middle grade market where kids are pretty visually sophisticated and they're able to follow something that's told in multiple modes. And I hadn't seen that done in a way that really resonated with me. And I also knew that the marketing term du jour was hybrid book. So I figured I could pitch it that way and make it sound cool.
Right.
And I want to do something from a kid perspective and something really earnest from a kid perspective. I still really connect with the version of myself that existed when I was 10 or 11. Tender little weirdo. And I just wanted to, play around with that in a way that was not autobiographical, but that had some of that same feeling and curiosity about the world that's not yet weighed down with like sexuality or outer world politics, but it was really just about the world that you're discovering meeting the world that you create as a small child.
Right.
Well, I'm kind of glad that you brought that up because that's something that Dave and I wanted to talk about with you because you and your career make a really good case as a counterpoint to something that we talk about on the show an awful lot. And that is publishing versus self-publishing. Mm-hmm. And Dave and I come out very, very strongly for self-publishing, except you, on the other hand, especially for the children's book market, have found that going through publishers, going the more traditional route has been more beneficial for you. And we'd like to hear you talk about that for a little bit, what your experience has been, why you've chosen that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that I am very mercenary when it comes to how I get comics out in the world. I've obviously spent a lot of time in webcomics and crowdfunded self-publishing. I've also done stuff with comics-only publishers, like my series The Long Con that's out from Oni Press right now, publishing in individual issues and then collected in trade paperback. And now I've worked with a traditional children's book publisher, like the most traditional children's book publisher. Candlewick is owned by a British parent company. They send all their contracts hard copy. Like that's how old school these people are.
No digital signatures.
Yeah. Like literally, they will not send my contract as a PDF. It comes in an envelope, 2-day mail from Boston.
Who owns Candlewick? Is that Walker?
It's Walker, yeah. And my editors, they got the rights to the Walker name back to use in the U.S., so they started up a new imprint with my editor heading it up called Walker Books US. And
fun.
Is one of the debut books from that imprint. So
that's very cool.
Yeah, it's super nifty. But so I do not particularly advocate for any one of those methods over any other in a general sense. The thing I always want to do is make a compelling story and present it to audiences in the most effective way to get it to them without completely losing my shirt.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's a good bottom line on what your asks are. That's good.
Yeah. Don't starve and find where the people are.
Don't bankrupt me, and also let me tell the story. Well, I mean, the big takeaway here in listening to you is that it would be as much as Brad and I are like own and control it yourself, self-publish, own the imprint, own the rights, own everything. And that's all well and good. But the simple fact is, if Brad and I were doing what you are doing, or what anybody shooting for middle schoolers is doing, it's virtually impossible to reach them since they don't have their own buying power without going through the intermediaries of publishers and Scholastic and distribution and book fairs and all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, I think you can do pretty well using portals like Webtoons. Those are pretty good at reaching a younger audience, but still, like, they're not necessarily hitting tweens I hate that word tweens, but that's what we're stuck with. They're not as good at hitting the kids who are not allowed unsupervised internet time. And Webtoons is kind of a mixed platform in that some of their creators are kind of flagship creators who have access to an editor and who get a page rate, and some it's really just a hosting platform. So there are some places to do it, and there are a lot of youth-run platforms where I think you can succeed in reaching that audience, but monetizing it is a lot trickier. And there are a lot of technical constraints. Like with Webtoons, they really want you to focus on panels that are the same size, each panel, and that can be viewed well on a cell phone. So if you want to do, say, a rich, immersive, watercolored hybrid novel set in an alternate history Tudor England with very deliberate pacing, probably Webtoons is not a good fit.
Right.
And if I were doing a graphic novel for an adult audience, I would have to, well, as I have and will continue to do, I really have to think about the economics of it and about where the most appropriate audience for the comic is getting their stuff from. Like, The Long Con is about nerd culture. It's about comics conventions. It's a black comedy about those things, but it's very much a book designed for people who go to comic book stores or go to conventions and who buy physical graphic novels. Those people who are buying, Saga or Matt Fraction stuff.
Right.
And so there's so much inside baseball that it made a lot of sense for it to be coming out in comic book stores. And I had a co-writer. I didn't want to be the artist. It would have taken way too long to make money off of it as a webcomic. So taking it to a publisher that had a great presence in those nerd spaces like Oni Press was definitely the way to go. It just wasn't something I was going to be able to get off the ground and present in the way I wanted to the audience I wanted through webcomics or through self-publishing.
Before we move on too far from this, I want to talk one last thing, and I don't think I pitched this to you or Brad as a potential topic, but it's a good one to talk about. At one point, you were frankly swimming in projects. And I don't think it's unfair to say that it was probably too much. I mean, you were doing Queen of the Sea, you were doing the Long Con, you were still, I think at that point, producing pages for Family Man. And I think there was a fourth project that has not yet been revealed to the world that you were also working on. And
I mean, I was also writing for PvP really regularly.
Right. Yeah. That's true, too. Yeah. So what were your strategies for managing that? And then in terms of self-care, how did you resolve that issue eventually?
I believe that at the time I described it to you as it's not sustainable in a sing-song voice.
Well, that's what I was getting at, but I wanted to hear it from you.
Honestly, I still have about that level of stuff going on.
Brad, we just hear her trail off from the mic and just walk out of this room. Just
have I mentioned that my wife broke her femur? Yeah. It's been quite a season. I still have a ton of projects going on. I have 2 gigs that I don't own, but that I'm doing all the production work for. One of which is children's publishing, and one of which is tech company communications stuff. LongCon is done, thank goodness, but I'm still going to be doing press for the second volume of it.
Okay.
I have press for Queen of the Sea. I'm working on all the starter stuff for a sequel to Queen of the Sea.
Wow.
Nice.
And, I also am a member of a studio where I help out with administrative duties. I have a rescue dog with needs. There's a lot going on. And in terms, I don't know how I balance it.
That's what I was getting at, was how do you balance it? And you're like, I don't know that I am. You're just actively pulling out hair as we talk.
Some of it's luck, and also just a lot of practice at spinning multiple plates and knowing how to strategically neglect things when they go into brief remission.
Strategically neglect. I like that. Okay.
And unfortunately,
that's how I feel about my friendship with Brad. That's what I do.
Right? Yeah, strategic neglect. One of the things that's really taken the hit has mostly been Family Man, which I still intend to finish, but I just haven't had the bandwidth to put out pages for it.
Right.
So it's been right around 2 years since I've put out new content, and I have a second volume ready to go for print, but I just haven't had the energy or the focus to do a Kickstarter for the print run. So that's kind of been the burner that I had to turn off, which is frustrating, but I know I'll get back to it. It's just kind of waiting for a few things to flush out of the system and open up space so I can get back to it.
Right. I like, as a takeaway, I like that idea of strategic neglect. Thank you for that. That's a phrase I never would have thought
that's very
put
good.
Together.
You pick it up right before it starts to go totally off the line.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics. So, Brad, I forgot to mention at the top of the show, this podcast will be coming out right about the time of San Diego Comic-Con, so I should mention that I will be there all 5 days signing at booth 1228 on the 1200 row. It's in the webcomics area, and I will be right next to Topatico. And Dylan, I think this is a little special announcement for you as well. First time back, right, in a while?
Yeah, in almost 10 years.
10 years.
Wow.
We finally get Dylan back into San Diego Comic-Con after some disastrous appearances back in the day.
Cool.
But so what, do you happen to know the booth number so that folks can find you at Candlewick?
Let me see. No, wait, 5532.
5532, virtually right next door to me at 1228. We could almost throw a stone, and if the stone, by that I mean if you launched it on a trebuchet, we would be right next to each other. So please go visit Dylan and check out the beautiful new book at San Diego, and please come visit me, and by all means say hi and mention that you are a Comic Lab listener. I would love to hear it, and Brad would love to hear it.
Without a doubt.
Now, let us jump in, Bradley J. Geiger of Philadelphia, PA, into some of the reader questions, actually. Do you want to jump in with the first one?
Oh, I so do. So we've got a question from a question asker that wants to know about working with an editor. Okay.
Oh, how appropriate for Dylan. All right.
Yeah.
Hey, so Yana asks, I know from the show that you folks have a circle of professional friends that you might flick a strip to for feedback. But have you ever worked with someone like an editor on your long-form comics to get critique or feedback on an overarching story? I'm thinking that hiring an experienced freelance editor might be a good idea for honing the craft. First, she says, fist to wood, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
No, Yana, don't support that phrase, fist to wood. No. Yana, take that back.
No, Yana, your instincts are just right, Yana. If you do think it's a good idea, do you know of anyone that you might recommend? The comic community here in Australia is wonderful, but pretty small, and I don't know anyone locally with experience to tell the kind of stories I like to tell. Thanks so much for the laughs and advice. I look forward to every episode. You know what, Dave? I just got to take a second to say we've got a growing, burgeoning listenership in Australia.
I know. I almost feel like, because they always say in their questions, hey, there's no one in Australia that does comics. We got to connect all these people because we have like 15 different listeners down in Sydney and in different cities. So they should have a meetup down there.
Well, hopefully Yana jumps into the Discord server because I know that a lot of them hang out down there as well. So
now, Brad, out of courtesy, you and I can jump into this question, but I think it is actually better to open it up with Dylan because you have worked on your own long-form stuff, sans editor, and on long-form stuff with an editor of great note. So why don't you take us through the differences and the advantages for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've also hired a freelance editor to help me out with my self-published long-form stuff. So
I did not know that. All right.
I've done it all. Generally, if there are multiple ways to try doing something, I have attempted them all. And 3/4 of them have been abject failures, but you won't hear about them. No, that's not true.
What made them? Well, I'm more interested in the drama. What made them failures?
No, I was joking. All my editors have been great. It's kind of cool. It's obnoxious. No, I've been extraordinarily lucky in the editors I've worked with for my graphic novel Family Man, which is a self-published webcomic in origin. I hired Jay Edidin to do some overall story editing with me just to clarify the overall plot arc. And that was an incredibly helpful experience just because I've been so in the weeds on the book and really getting stuck with what would move things forward. So having his perspective on, as an outside brain was incredibly helpful. Right. Mm-hmm. And he had a long time background working at Dark Horse. So he had worked on a really wide range of different titles. And so, that was just a really great sort of overall, like, almost life coach experience.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And in terms of editors at publishers, the Long Con series has benefited tremendously from having Robin Herrera and Ari Yarwood. Ari recently retired from working at Oni full-time, but is still doing some part-time work. Robin is still there in a full editorial capacity. But they were incredibly, incredibly helpful because we had this giant multi-headed plot that has a really complex payoff with literally a cast of dozens and a lot of continuity and a lot of fake media franchises that needed to kind of all stay consistent and a regular publishing schedule. So having them to say, hey guys, this part doesn't make sense, or could you build up this character a little bit more, or this part's lagging a little bit, can you maybe add some action, was really great.
Right, right.
And there's just a lot of cat herding. There's just a ton of production stuff with the team comic also where they're coordinating with our letterer, Aditya Bidikar, who lives in India.
Right.
That's stuff that I don't have to worry about. I can just worry about turning in a script.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. When it's almost in the TV equivalency, like being a producer. It's getting all the ducks in a row. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, Brad, have you ever chosen to hire an editor?
I've hired an editor for yes and no. I've hired like a copy editor just before my book went to press to make sure that there weren't any spelling errors. And generally the copy editors that I've worked with have pointed out some simple things that could be easily addressed, because at this point the comic is done. For the most part.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit late to say, oh, you've got a major problem in Act 2 or something like that. But spelling errors and stuff like that, they catch. And that's been helpful, because you certainly don't want to see that in the final product. But in terms of an editor working through the creative process, no, I haven't done it, although I definitely see the value in it. I haven't had that experience. Have you?
No, the best way I can describe this is to say curmudgeonly, I have avoided editors. And I think you probably both know what I mean by that. It's just like, I'm like, nobody's going to tell me what I'm going to do. I'm not listening to anybody. You get off my lawn. I'm drawing my own thing. But listen, if I'm being logical about it, would Drive be better with an editor? Maybe. Mm-hmm. Would it really interrupt the way that I like to create the story? Definitely.
Yeah.
It's long form story told page by page over the course of now almost a decade. And I don't know that I could have hired an editor that would have stuck with it consistently and that would have had the patience, frankly, for the pace that I work at. And I don't know that it would have been a normal editing experience. But that being said, though, I want to help Jana by giving them some resources that they could turn to. And one thing that immediately hits me, and Dylan's point actually raises this in my mind, is that, for example, Lion Forge Comics here in the U.S. just did or is about to lay off a bunch of editors, right? Mm-hmm. These are all pros. They're all incredibly talented. It would not be the worst thing in the world, Jana, to keep track of the industry about who's getting massive layoffs. Like every once in a while, Dark Horse will lay off 20, or in this case, Lion Forge will lay off a half dozen, or Oni, or First Second, or somebody. Every once in a while, there's always somebody laying off a group. And even if that's not the case, you can always reach out to current editors and say, I know you're busy, but is there anybody that you would recommend that does edit in the genre or style or approach?
Right.
And if they're a kind person, they'd be like, oh, yeah, my buddy so-and-so who I used to work with at First Second, who's now independent, would love to, she's great. She would love to take on this job for you or something. What other options do you think we could present Jana with between the both of you?
I see these people on Twitter all the time saying that they're available to take freelance, or they're coming up for air after a recent project. I would put a couple of choice keywords into a Twitter search and see who you dug up that way, like comics editor, et cetera. Because it just through my own feed, I'll see this kind of thing pop up quite frequently, where they'll say, I'm looking for a project if you know of anybody. So doing a keyword search on Twitter would be my next step.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel dirty just for saying this out loud, but Twitter is the LinkedIn of the comics industry.
It kind of is, yeah.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
If you're looking to hire or to make professional connections, that's really the best place to start. And I mean, you don't have to follow everybody who works for so-and-so publisher. You can start with your favorite creators and just see who they're talking to that might be available for more administrative or editorial level work. Even people who you think are too busy, almost nobody is going to be angry when somebody approaches them saying, hello, I would like to give money to somebody well qualified who you like.
Right. And it's the money that's the key indicator there. That's where everybody in comics goes, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, you do need to pay for it. Honestly, though, sometimes just working with a friend who is a strong writer is a really good way to go. You can pay them back however they're comfortable with, but I've absolutely provided editorial services for friends. In the more prose writing and fanfic world, they call that a beta reader, where you have somebody who is an outside brain and who understands how stories are constructed, or who's a good fit for the kind of story you're telling, basically goes over your manuscript with you and tries to solve problems, identify points that maybe aren't flowing as well, and just generally helps you pull the story together. And I think that's a really awesome cultural phenomenon that comics would do really well to echo more. Mm-hmm. It's obviously a little easier to do in prose because there are fewer major production stages than there are in comics.
Right,
but I still think there are a lot of opportunities for us to reach out to each other as peers and say, hey, I'm having trouble with this. Can you look over it with me and just kind of brainstorm a little bit? And I'll do the same for you, or I'll open up a commission slot for you, or I'm happy to do copy editing for you, or color grading, whatever. So I'd encourage you to reach out to friends who you think might have the skills also.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I think all three of us, even if it's not necessarily with each other, at different points in the comics community that we're a part of in the U.S., at Comic-Cons or online or on the phone, we've probably reached out at one point or another to a friend in comics and said, hey, I've got two possible ways I can take this story. What are your thoughts? Or, hey, what do you think is lacking right now in the way this arc is developing?
Right.
And it's so nice just to have, as Dylan said, an outside brain. Even if they're not a quote-unquote expert, they just go, oh, well, actually, I was confused by that, or you know what, actually, have you considered this? Just the second human being saying, hey, maybe this other path is the better way to go is helpful, even if it just helps you clarify your own thoughts on the matter.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, all right. Well, let's move on to the next one, young Bradley J. What do you think? And Yana, you're invited to never again submit the phrase "fist to wood." I continue to hold out that is not a phrase in English, and so
it's catching on down under. But meanwhile, I've got another really good question that I want to bounce off of you guys. You ready for this?
Let's do it.
Bob Glasscock writes, I'm in a bit of a bind. I got laid off last fall, and with the effort put into finding a new job, work on my comic has ground to a halt. The job hunt is my top priority, but I was wondering if you had any advice on how I can get my creative juices flowing again.
Wow.
So advice for Bob. And of course, that's kind of like everybody's nightmare. You lost the day job. And that's obviously got to come first. There's no question about Bob's priorities here. He's like, I've got to get the day job back, but he doesn't want to give up on the comic either. But when you're stressed out and you're trying to figure out a mortgage payment or a rent payment, and all of this stuff is circling around your head, it's really tough to be creative. So let's give him some advice. How do we address this?
Oh boy,
wow.
I can totally take this one.
All right, go. Jump on it.
Because I have burnt out on a couple of occasions, or had to really step away from something so long that going back is like, first time going back to the gym in 3 years. My number one advice is to make it really delicious for yourself. I mean, what's the thing that's so fun that you basically don't think it counts?
Oh.
That could be just doing like a goofy fan art of your favorite TV show or video game. It can be just doodling character designs and doing one a day. Just literally anything that feels like it's too fun to count is absolutely what you need to be doing. And when I've had friends who've really just gotten stuck, like on a strip in particular, they're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what storyline to pursue. My advice is always, well, what would be the most self-indulgent, fun storyline you can think of? Like, it would just be too fun so that it doesn't feel like it's legitimate. And they immediately know what it is. They're like, well, it would be, a pack of bunnies invades the house, because I love drawing bunnies and I just think it would be so funny. And I saw that one bunny video. I'm like, there you go. That's a great idea, though. Like, nobody's going to read that and be like, he's enjoying himself too much.
Right.
And, stuff like fan art, it's not your original work, but people enjoy it. And sometimes what you need is just to get that boost again, and of having people go, oh my gosh, dude, I love this. Or this is so fun. Or that's great. Or, man, I love this too. You really nailed it. Like, after finishing Queen of the Sea, I was just absolutely blasted. And I'm not going to lie, I went back to fandom after like 15 years of not participating in any formal social aspects of online fandom. And it was absolutely what I needed. I was like, all of a sudden I went from, not drawing anything that wasn't for work, and being sort of on a recovery break, meaning I wasn't doing anything, to like drawing like 4 things a day. And
wow, really? Okay.
Yeah, and like getting a whole separate set of fans and friends that I hadn't accessed through original work. And it was just kind of the tank. My tank was empty, and it really filled it up again in a way that was totally unrelated to the big projects that I was intimidated to return to.
Right.
So, just indulge yourself. Start light.
Can I jump off of that one, Brad, before you go? Do you mind if I jump in next?
Go right ahead.
So I have a couple thoughts about this, and it's funny that it should come up, I think, in last week's show, and I think it will come up again here in this conversation. And that is, I always love referencing in this kind of situation Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because to me, this is exactly the situation where creativity is hard because the things lower down are not yet taken care of. And so if you're not familiar with it, just imagine the Great Pyramid of Giza, and at the bottom of it are the needs that you need to do the most basic aspects of life. You need to eat, you need to sleep, you need to have shelter, you need to be safe, right? That's the bottom of the pyramid. And then as you move up, you need relationships, you need love. And then at the top of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization, self-esteem, and frankly, I would add into it creativity. And so it's really hard, and I just want you to know from the three of us as artists, we all respect the fact that it's really hard to take action at the top of that pyramid when you're still actively working on the bottom of that pyramid right now. Right? Like you have anxieties, you have fears, you have the need for a job, which will provide all the basics of living. And so it's okay to say to yourself, hey, maybe I'm not going to be so creative right now because it's really hard for me to mentally get there. So that's my first one, right? And then the second part, I want to really echo and play off of Dylan's idea, because I think we have a similar idea. For you, it was tapping back into fandoms, tapping back into the drawings that got you as a teen into drawing, right? And then for me, I think another way to do that, and basically that was taking the pressure off Dylan. It wasn't work. It wasn't something that was going to generate money, right? It was just the fun of it, the fun of drawing. And I would advocate something that I've said before, which is draw on the back of large envelopes that come in the mail. Because there is something weird about paper that is unimportant that lets you just be free and be silly and have fun with drawing. Whereas sometimes even just getting out a piece of sketch paper, you're like, I'm wasting this paper. I don't deserve to be drawing on this paper with this silly idea that I have. And sometimes when you're feeling stuck, when you're not feeling creative, you just have to let yourself play. And so like Dylan with drawing fandom again, honestly, drawing on the back of envelopes is just saying, to hell with it. I'm just having fun. I'm going to throw this away in 5 minutes. I can draw whatever the heck I want. And so that's one way that I would try to translate this desire into drawing. Brad, what is your suggestions here?
Well, I'll round it out by just bringing up the fact that it's okay if you don't do a comic for a little while. It's okay for you to take a little bit of time and focus on those other needs that are more pressing in your life right now. Because like I've said on this show before, the internet is going to be there when you come back. Your readers are going to be there when you come back. Social media, for better or for worse, is going to be there when you come back. And it's okay to take a break. It's okay to pause a little bit and come back when you're feeling stronger, especially if doing this right now is a source of stress in your life. My immediate thought is you need as little stress in your life as possible right now. So if trying to hit this deadline and trying to keep up this production cycle is causing you stress, then be rid of it for a little while. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is you've hit the pause button, and that's okay, especially when you're trying to figure out something as important as finding a new day job. Let yourself off the hook. All that stuff's going to be there when you come back. Yeah,
I think that's a great way to close that out, because I think Dylan and I would both concur with that. Is just be kind to yourself. It's okay that this moment is on pause, and that's in the grand scheme of life. It's okay that you took a couple months, maybe even a couple years off, and that's quite all right.
Yeah,
it's all going to be there when you come back.
All right. Well, I'm going to move us on, and Bob, hopefully that answered your question. This next question comes in from Eric Campling, and it says, Dave and Brad and Dave, I have a writing and revising question. What are your thoughts on how to recognize your quote darlings when you're proofreading your script's storylines, and how to tell if they're in need of murdering? So this is that phrase, and I'm going to admit to you, Dylan, I didn't know what it meant. I had to ask Brad earlier this week, kill your darlings. So I've been doing comics for 20 years, been writing for even longer than that. I did not know what kill your darlings meant. And I was like, Brad,
Dave.
Can I be a dummy? What does kill your darlings mean? And he had to explain it to me.
That's precious.
So Brad, first, for the benefit of another alternate universe Dave Kellett out there that doesn't know what kill your darlings means, could you, or maybe let's let Dylan do it. Dylan, what does kill your darlings mean?
Yeah, kill your darlings or murder your darlings is, like Chekhov's gun, a term popular in writing. In this case, it means you've got to get rid of the stuff that you love, that you just adore, that you think is the greatest line or the coolest plot twist or the neatest character that doesn't actually benefit the story. So it's the stuff that you don't want to drop because it's so great, but kind of is warping the space around it. And that is a darling you need to murder.
Right.
Yeah, and a great example is George R.R. Martin is a famous or infamous darling killer. I mean, there's no character that he's created that he's got any pause or hesitation at all about getting rid of, right? And you take that same idea down to the editing level, where you're taking that to phrases and passages and even concepts that nothing is too delightful to you as an author that you're not willing to get rid of it for the sake of making the story itself better.
I might argue he takes it too far in the other direction, where he's actually an axe
Maybe he
murderer.
does. Yeah.
So for him, we need to be like, okay, now George, just save one darling.
Murder most of your darlings.
Yeah, like you don't need to be homicidal. Let's just save one darling. All right, so now let's address Eric's question now that you both have explained that. So when you're proofreading your scripts and storylines, how do you tell, both of you, whether your darlings are in need of murdering or whether they are actually central to the story or essential or at least an enjoyable enough part of the story to save? How do you determine that?
Well, I'll take the easy way out and I'll say this. I think one thing that you can do to address this is similar to something we talked about earlier, and that is get a second opinion that you can trust. Get somebody in there to tell you, especially because I think a lot of times we suspect where the darlings are. We have a suspicion that it's there, but we don't want to admit it to ourselves. And so getting a second opinion that you can trust. And that's really important, not just your neighbor across the street or your spouse or something like that. In fact, it might not be very polite to put your spouse in that situation unless you have that kind of relationship. But getting a second opinion from someone who you can trust and then have the courage to know that making that story better by getting rid of this thing that you love is the right decision. And always remember that you've got a lifetime of creativity ahead of yourself. This whole thing that you've constructed that you're cutting isn't right for this story. That doesn't mean that you can't keep it in your back pocket and find out a year or two down the road that this whole thing that wasn't right for that story is perfect for this thing you're working on now. I don't believe anything's ever lost completely when it comes to writing. I never consider it as a delete button, just a not right now button. Right.
Yeah.
I'm not getting rid of it. It's just, this isn't the right place for it. And maybe sometime down the line, the timing will be better. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I have something in every project that I call the morgue. Which will be
a lot of death imagery here.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's useful. I work a lot in Scrivener, which is a program dedicated to writing. And it's a way of having a central file that you can have a lot of little documents branching off of. So I always have one document that I call the morgue. And that is where I dump like little scenelets or passages where I'm like, oh, there's some really good writing in this, but I just keep moving it around and trying to find out ways to make it work. And that's the number one sign that something needs to go.
Yeah.
But rather than cause myself the agony of just deleting it into the void, I set it in the morgue. It's like a nice little space where it can just rest and be quiet and enjoy the cool and the calm. And then, you know what, half the time, like, yeah, I find some other place to put it, whether it's another story or whether it ends up being a really good fit later on.
Yeah.
And that just makes it feel less like you're giving up something crucial and more like you're just setting it aside until you really know what to do with it.
Right.
And that's tough.
I think there's some wisdom too in the way you were describing that, which is that you did bring it into the world on some level, like whether it's a character, whether it's a passage. It's not like you go, well, it doesn't deserve anything, because then it'll keep scratching at your mind. But there is something about creating it, but setting it aside, or at least jotting down enough of it that it can sit over here.
Yeah.
And you at least captured the idea.
Well, and honestly, sometimes a whole project is a darling. You know, it's just like it doesn't work or it doesn't gel, and you know in your heart of hearts, like this shambling mutant baby needs to be set aside. And you know what? Like, honestly, I've had ideas that didn't work at the time, and then literally 10 years later, I'm like, oh, I know how I could make that work, actually. Or, what if I take that whole central premise and just move it over into this setting, and now it's great. So nothing is ever truly lost.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that, because I have two stories from that I've been sitting on for 20 years that I hold on to them, but I have yet to figure out the angle, the turn that makes them work. But they're still very active in the back of my mind. Yep. And I think every artist has that. One way that I try to remove passages or characters or moments that delight me to no end, but don't get me anywhere for what I need to accomplish in the story, is to kind of mentally write that scene, that chapter, that moment without that part in there and see how it works, you know? So if it's a character that I've been using too much, if it's a moment that a shtick that has now become a runner that shouldn't have become a runner, if it's some scene that is absolutely just distracting from the central point of a chapter, then just mentally write it without it and go, oh, you know what? Yeah, this shouldn't be in here. This is for me. It's not helping the story at all. And go ahead and set it aside. And like Dylan's point, it'll find its way into something else eventually. Usually it's a Sheldon moment that'll find its way into Drive, a Drive moment that'll find its way into Sheldon, or it'll just sit on a shelf and find its way into a new project, you know, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, and I will say from my own personal experience, I started something on my Patreon page that I just call Bonus Cartoon. And a lot of times what'll happen is I'll take maybe a punchline or an angle or some little part of humor that doesn't work in the storyline that I'm writing, but I thought it was clever nonetheless. I'll repurpose that as a single panel standalone cartoon and just offer it as a bonus to my Patreon backers on an incidental basis. And that also is very satisfying, because then it still gets birthed into the world. You still get a chance to share that idea with someone. It becomes literally a bonus for your Patreon backers, and they love getting bonuses, and you get a lot of satisfaction out of that.
Yeah, we live in a magical age where no piece of content is too small.
Right. Yeah. Worst case scenario, you tweet it out as a quick sketch, or you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we got that one done. So hopefully, Eric, we answered that question, because I want to move on to one last one before we lose Dylan, and I think this is a fun one for all three of us. So this comes in from Shell, and Shell says, "Hi, Brad and Dave. It was so great to meet both of you at NCS Fest." Oh, Shell, of course, I remember. You guys are even funnier in person. That's a delightful lie. Thank you, Shell. My question this time is, what is your favorite thing about making comics? I'm not talking about the business end here, because all that adulting stuff is necessary but boring. What I want to know is, what do you enjoy doing most, or what makes you feel the most satisfied for your work? Thanks, and keep up the great work. And that's Shell from Portland. So we'll open that up to our guests first. Dylan, now coming off the end of a long slog, thinking back to the joy-filled moments, what is the most fun part about making comics for you?
Well, I'm a pretty acting-focused cartoonist, so I really, really love those moments of cartooning where I get to pay off a whole story's worth of interaction between two characters with just an exchange of looks. That's just, it's totally visually expressed. It's been backed up by a ton of dialogue and action, but just having that moment and knowing that the reader knows what's going on. It's just like just those moments, those perfect little coda moments that work so beautifully in comics in particular. Those are a real payoff for me.
Yeah. Brad, how about you? What is your favorite part about making comics? We'll keep that nice and broad.
I think for me, it's when I realize I've written something that's really connects with my reader, and most often and most satisfying, it's a joke. It's something that's funny. It's a punchline that really hits well. For me, it's finding the humor. And realizing on those rare occasions that something really worked well. Trying to describe humor, trying to figure out humor, trying to make humor hit with any one particular person, let alone an entire audience, is really difficult. And when you get that feedback, that somebody, you get some of those phrases like I spat coffee on my computer screen, or something like that. When you get those tweets that thing that you had constructed really worked the way you intended it, that's I eat out on that for days and days and days.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way about that. There's that moment when you first put up a comic or a page or tweet it or Instagram it, and I will admit that there's just a childish joy to the, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Wait till they see this.
Yeah, you can't wait for it.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm going to split it up two different ways. There's a physical part about creating comics that I love, and there's a part about writing comics that I love, and I'm going to share both of those. So for me, the single most enjoyable moment of comics, the moment I wish I could bottle up and save, is when I am drawing a comic and it is 2/3 done. And specifically when I'm inking, not when I'm digitally drawing, but when I have a pen and ink or a brush and ink, something about that tactile feeling of a physical object that's almost done being created. Those last 15 minutes of drawing to me brings such joy. I love that moment. It's delightful. Now, having said that, I absolutely love drawing digitally because you can do all sorts of tips and tricks, or not tips and tricks, but tricks and visuals that you could never do. But there's something about creating a physical object that I love. So that for me is chef's kiss. It's delicious. I love that, right?
Being on the precipice.
Yeah, exactly. Just being done about finished a drawing, but still in the moment. Like I'm still drawing. I'm still putting in like the chiaroscuro or the little cross hatches or whatever it is, but I'm almost done. I can see the promised land, right?
Yeah.
And then the second thing that I love, and both of you will appreciate this for writing long form, is I love when I'm just about to reveal a twist or a turn that I planted as a seed 200 pages ago.
Yeah.
And I'm literally, this is me at my desk drawing it going, oh, wait till they get a load of this. Oh boy, everybody's going to be so surprised. And honestly, once I share that page and people start to go, wait a minute, does that mean this was back in chapter 2 when you said, and I'm like, yes, it does. Yes, it does. I get so giddy when I get to like I've been waiting 2 years to use, like I finally get to use Chekhov's gun that I put on stage, 10 years ago. And it's so great when I get that moment. I love it.
Yeah, it's wonderful watching people freak out and you're like, I made you feel that way. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I did this. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's just it. There's a common thread in all of our answers, and that's connecting with the readers on one format or one way or another. It's that moment of communication, that moment that you've connected with another person through this medium in one way or another.
Right. Yeah, that's true. You're right.
It's all about the fact that we've been able to touch somebody in different ways through our work. And I think that may be almost universal. I think if you asked 20 cartoonists what they love most about it, there'd be a kernel of that in almost every one of them.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, on that note, I want to thank our wonderful friend Dylan for coming by and visiting us. Dylan, it was delightful having you on the show today, and I really appreciated your insights and frankly the excitement of your book, which is dropping June 25th.
Yeah.
And just as a reminder to everybody, that's going to be available both on Amazon and bookstores, probably in comic book shops. Is that right?
The better ones, yes.
the finer ones. And that's Queen of the Sea. It's going to be from Candlewick on June 25th. And as always, you can check out more of Dylan's work at dylanmeconis.com, DylanMeconis.com.
That's me.
And that means it's my turn to say, you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And just a reminder, if you're going to San Diego Comic-Con, Dylan will be in the 500 row. I will be in the 1200 row. Please come see us. And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode and all episodes were edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions at www.woodsong.media.
Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So we're going to say that twice, patreon.com/comiclab.